Stop everything, because if you thought Washington politics couldn't get messier, louder, or more petty, think again. According to whispers blowing through MAGA media like a Category 5 storm, J.D. Vance is absolutely fuming, and the reason has a name: Regina King. Yes, that Regina King, the woman everyone thought would stay quiet, stay loyal, stay predictable. Spoiler alert, she didn't. Here's the headline nobody was supposed to write. Regina King didn't just distance herself from J.D. Vance, she allegedly flipped the script. Now ask yourself this: why would a grieving widow suddenly dominate Fox News airtime? Why is she popping up at Mar-a-Lago like it's her second home? And why did J.D. Vance's inner circle reportedly go dead silent the moment her name came up in a 2028 strategy call? Sources say smiles disappeared, phones started buzzing, and one question echoed behind closed doors: is Regina King preparing to run? Not beside J.D. Vance, but straight over him? What looks like sympathy on the surface is starting to feel like strategy. What sounds like unity is starting to crack like thin ice. So buckle up, because if even half of what's circulating is true, this isn't just a political feud. It's the beginning of a power shift nobody saw coming. They didn't plan for this video of the story to go public. In fact, according to people who claim to have been in the room, Regina King was never supposed to become the headline. She was supposed to be the symbol, the bridge, the emotional centerpiece that kept certain voters loyal, quiet, and predictable. But politics has a funny way of turning background figures into main characters, and once the cameras start rolling, control becomes an illusion. What everyone agrees on is this: after Malcolm Jamal Warner's death, the spotlight around Regina King didn't fade, it intensified. At first, it looked natural. Sympathy interviews, carefully worded appearances, soft lighting, gentle questions. But then something shifted. The tone hardened. The venues changed. Instead of daytime sympathy segments, she was suddenly everywhere at night: closed-door fundraisers, elite galas, and yes, the places where power brokers don't usually invite just grieving widows. That's when whispers started. Quiet at first, then louder. Why her? Why now? According to several unnamed insiders, Regina wasn't just attending these events. She was hosting them, directing conversations, pulling donors aside, asking questions that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with influence. Questions about loyalty, questions about 2028, questions about who would still matter when the current political stars burned out. And this is where J.D. Vance enters the picture. Not smiling, not clapping, but watching for years. Vance had been treated as the inevitable next step, the heir apparent, the man whose rise felt pre-approved by the media ecosystem that surrounds conservative politics. He was comfortable in that role, comfortable enough to assume that anyone orbiting his world was doing so in support of him. Regina King, at least at first, appeared no different until she stopped answering questions the way she was expected to. The moment that keeps replaying in political group chats happened during what should have been a throwaway interview. When asked directly whether she would support J.D. Vance in the 2028 election, Regina paused. Not a media pause, not a dramatic pause, a calculating pause. And then she smiled and said something so neutral it felt aggressive. She talked about keeping options open and the country needing strong voices in unexpected places. Unexpected places. That single phrase reportedly sent shockwaves through Vance's camp. Because in politics, neutrality is rarely neutral. It's a warning. And from that moment on, insiders claimed the relationship began to fracture behind closed doors. J.D. Vance was not amused. According to one source who claims to have attended a private strategy meeting, Regina's name came up repeatedly not as an ally, but as a variable, a problem, someone who was freelancing inside a tightly controlled narrative, someone who wasn't sticking to the script. And that's when the tone allegedly changed. Phone calls that once when answered started going to voicemail. Invitations slowed. Access narrowed. But instead of fading, Regina's presence grew, almost defiantly. more interviews, more appearances, more moments where she positioned herself not as someone asking for permission, but as someone evaluating the room. Critics started noticing the shift too. Her language became sharper, her responses to dissent more aggressive. She defended institutions others were distancing themselves from. She challenged narratives she was once expected to echo. To some viewers, it felt brave. To others, it felt rehearsed. And to J.D. Vance's inner circle, it reportedly felt dangerous because here's the unspoken rule of political ecosystems. You don't outshine the centerpiece unless you plan to replace it. Social media, of course, did what it always does. Clips were slowed down, facial expressions analyzed. Body language experts suddenly appeared out of nowhere, explaining how Regina's posture screamed confidence, not mourning. Commentators joked that she looked less like someone healing and more like someone campaigning without admitting it, and then came the rumors that changed everything, allegedly. Donors began asking a new question behind the scenes. Not is J.D. Vance ready? But what if Regina runs? At first, it sounded absurd. A punchline. Then, it started sounding strategic. Regina King had name recognition, media discipline, and a narrative that couldn't be easily attacked without backlash. She wasn't coming from nowhere. She was coming from inside the house. J.D. Vance, according to multiple anonymous accounts, didn't take this lightly. His frustration allegedly spilled over in private conversations where he questioned her loyalty, her intentions, and her sudden appetite for influence. One source even claimed he described her rise as manufactured, a word that carries weight in political circles obsessed with authenticity. But here's the irony: the more he pushed back, the stronger her image became. Publicly, Regina said nothing. No denials, no clarifications, no reassurances. And silence in politics is often louder than confession. The absence of a no began to sound like a not yet, and the media, always hungry, filled in the gaps with speculation that quickly hardened into narrative. By the time commentators started openly discussing Regina King as a potential presidential contender, the line had already been crossed. J.D. Vance was no longer the uncontested future. He was now part of a storyline where he looked reactive instead of inevitable, and insiders claimed that realization did not sit well with him at all. The tension, they say, reached a boiling point during a private event where Regina reportedly commanded more attention than expected. More donors approached her, more cameras followed her movements, and J.D. Vance, standing just feet away, watched the spotlight drift. That's when the word rage began circulating. Not public rage, not Twitter rage. The kind of controlled, internal fury that politicians reserve for moments when power feels like it's slipping through their fingers. From that night on, sources claim everything changed. Conversations turned colder, alliances grew fragile, and the question no one wanted to ask out loud started echoing in every room: was Regina King just playing the role everyone gave her? Or was she preparing to rewrite it entirely, even if that meant stepping directly into J.D. Vance's path and daring him to respond? And as that question hung unanswered, the story didn't slow down. It accelerated, pulling more names, more rumors, and more consequences into its orbit, setting the stage for what would come next, where speculation hardened, loyalties cracked, and the line between performance and ambition became almost impossible to see. Because once the narrative escaped the back rooms and hit the public bloodstream, it mutated into something far more volatile than anyone anticipated. By the time Regina King's name started trending alongside words like power play and succession, the damage was already done. What had begun as whispers among donors and strategists suddenly felt like a full-blown media feeding frenzy. Anonymous accounts popped up claiming insider access. Screenshots of supposed emails circulated without context, and every vague statement Regina made was dissected as if it were a coded message meant only for those who knew how to read between the lines. According to one so-called investigative leak that made the rounds, Regina had quietly assembled her own informal advisory circle. Not a campaign team, not officially, but a collection of consultants, former operatives, and media handlers who had all coincidentally worked on high-level political runs before. The leak claimed meetings were held under the guise of philanthropic planning, but somehow always drifted toward discussions of messaging, optics, and timing. Timing was the key word, because while J.D. Vance's camp was reportedly focused on locking down traditional allies, Regina's alleged circle was thinking 3 steps ahead. They weren't talking about whether she could win. They were talking about whether the system was ready for her to enter it. And more importantly, how much chaos her entry would cause among those who assumed the future already belonged to them. Public reaction split almost instantly. Supporters framed Regina as a refreshing wildcard, someone not shaped entirely by the political machine, someone who could speak to emotion, culture, and influence in a way polished politicians simply couldn't. Critics, meanwhile, accused her of opportunism, calling her rise convenient and her grief weaponized, a word that sparked its own backlash, but controversy only amplified her presence. Then came the so-called spending stories. Alleged expense reports surfaced online, claiming Regina-controlled organizations were funding lavish events disguised as charity functions, 5-star venues, private jets, security details that looked less like protection and more like presidential rehearsal. None of it was proven. None of it was denied either. And in the attention economy, ambiguity is fuel. Imaginary insiders went further, claiming Regina had access to donor networks that J.D. Vance himself struggled to energize. Old money donors, media-friendly donors, the kind who don't care about ideology as much as inevitability. According to these accounts, they saw in Regina something rare, a narrative that couldn't be easily attacked without looking cruel. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance's frustration reportedly became harder to contain. People close to him claimed he felt blindsided, not because Regina was ambitious, but because she wasn't asking permission. In private, he allegedly questioned who was backing her, who was whispering in her ear, and why certain media outlets suddenly seemed eager to frame her as more than a supporting character. One particularly viral rumor suggested a heated exchange took place off-camera, where Vance confronted a mutual associate and demanded to know whether Regina was being positioned as a rival. The associate allegedly replied with a single sentence that spread like wildfire online: "She doesn't need positioning. She already is one." From there, the narrative took on a life of its own. Commentators started drawing comparisons to past political upsets, where underestimated figures shattered carefully laid plans simply by refusing to stay in their lane. Memes portrayed Regina stepping into a spotlight, while others faded into the background. Satirical clips exaggerated J.D. Vance's supposed reactions, painting him as furious, rattled, and scrambling to reassert control. And then the fake documents appeared, blurry PDFs claiming to outline exploratory committees, draft speeches filled with patriotic language, and carefully vague promises. None verified, all shared thousands of times. Each one reinforced the same idea: Regina King wasn't reacting to politics anymore. Politics was reacting to her. The mega media ecosystem, sensing blood in the water, couldn't resist. Segments framed her as either a brilliant strategist or a dangerous distraction. Panels debated whether her rise was organic or engineered. Some accused her of being a Trojan horse. Others insisted she represented the movement's future, whether anyone liked it or not. Vance publicly maintained composure, calm statements, controlled interviews. But according to anonymous leaks, behind the scenes he was pushing hard to shut the speculation down. Advisors allegedly urged him to address the rumors head-on. Others warned that acknowledging them would only legitimize them. That internal disagreement, sources claim, led to fractures within his own team. At the same time, Regina's public demeanor grew even more confident. She spoke with authority. She corrected interviewers. She dismissed criticism with sharp, almost dismissive humor. To supporters, it read as strength. To detractors, arrogance. To neutral observers, it looked exactly like someone testing how much pressure they could withstand. Then came the hypothetical investigations. Online commentators began demanding transparency, calls for audits, calls for disclosures. Hashtags implying corruption trended briefly, then vanished, replaced by counter hashtags accusing critics of fear-mongering. The cycle repeated itself so quickly that no single narrative could dominate for long, which only added to the sense of chaos. Imaginary legal experts weighed in, speculating about what might happen if Regina officially declared. Would dormant inquiries suddenly surface? Would allies turn into witnesses? Would J.D. Vance's camp quietly encourage scrutiny while maintaining plausible deniability? No one knew, but everyone had theories, and in the middle of it all, Regina King stayed frustratingly unreadable. She neither confirmed nor denied anything. She didn't play defense. She didn't over-explain. She let the noise swirl, knowing that every argument about her relevance only increased it. By now, the question had shifted. It was no longer will Regina run? It was what happens if she does. Because the consequences wouldn't stop with her. They would ripple outward, destabilizing alliances, forcing early commitments, and dragging hidden tensions into the open. J.D. Vance, according to the loudest rumors, understood this better than anyone. He wasn't just facing a potential opponent. He was facing a narrative he didn't control. One that cast him not as the future, but as the obstacle standing in the way of a surprise contender whose rise felt both accidental and inevitable. And as the speculation grew louder, as fake leaks multiplied and public opinion hardened into camps, one thing became increasingly clear to everyone watching. This wasn't a temporary distraction. It was the beginning of fallout that would demand responses, trigger consequences, and push the story into its most dangerous phase yet, where power would be tested not by votes or speeches, but by endurance, exposure, and who could survive the storm that was now impossible to ignore. Because once a story reaches that stage, it stops being about intention and starts being about survival. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It crept in through side doors, late-night calls, and off-the-record warnings that suddenly felt very much on the record. According to circulating claims, donors began hesitating, not pulling out, just pausing, asking follow-up questions, wanting assurances that didn't exist yet. And in politics, hesitation is contagious. J.D. Vance's circle allegedly felt the pressure immediately. The same allies who once spoke in confident absolutes reportedly began using softer language. Words like if, depending, and will see slipped into conversations where certainty used to rule. And that shift alone was enough to set off alarms. Behind the scenes, imaginary strategists whispered about containment, about drawing lines, about reminding Regina King, subtly or otherwise, where the boundaries were supposed to be. But the problem with boundaries is that they only work if everyone agrees they're real. And Regina, by all appearances, did not. Instead, she leaned into the chaos. Her appearances became sharper, more deliberate. She spoke about leadership without qualifiers, about courage without naming names, about the danger of inherited power structures that assume loyalty instead of earning it. To casual viewers, it sounded inspirational. To insiders, it sounded pointed. Speculation about legal consequences followed naturally. Commentators began floating the idea of hypothetical probes. Nothing concrete, just the suggestion that questions might be asked if she continued on her current path. The kind of vague threat that's meant to intimidate without leaving fingerprints. But rather than retreat, Regina allegedly welcomed the scrutiny. According to one fabricated source, she told a confidant, "If they're watching, it means I matter." That quote, real or not, spread fast because it fit the narrative perfectly. J.D. Vance, meanwhile, was now portrayed as cornered. Not publicly, of course. On the surface, he remained composed, disciplined, presidential. But the rumor mill painted a different picture. Emergency meetings, reshuffled advisors, and long discussions about whether to confront the situation head-on or let it burn itself out. Neither option looked safe. If he attacked Regina directly, he risked appearing threatened, even cruel. If he ignored her, the silence would be interpreted as weakness. And so he did what many politicians do when trapped between bad choices. He waited, and waiting allowed the story to metastasize. Fake resignations were suddenly rumored. Anonymous posts claimed aides had stepped down in protest. Others insisted donors were quietly redirecting funds. None of it confirmed, all of it believable enough to spread. And once belief takes hold, facts become optional. Public backlash followed predictable lines. Supporters accused critics of sexism, of exploiting grief, of fearing a strong, unconventional figure. Opponents accused Regina of ambition without accountability, of playing politics behind a mask of tragedy. The discourse grew uglier, louder, more personal. And through it all, Regina King never once said the words everyone was waiting for. She didn't announce a run. She didn't deny one either. She let the vacuum speak for her. Imaginary analysts began warning of a broader financial impact. Markets hate uncertainty, they said. Donors hate unpredictability. Parties hate internal wars. If this continued, they claimed, it could fracture alliances long before any ballots were cast. The idea that a single figure could destabilize an entire ecosystem without officially declaring anything was both terrifying and fascinating. J.D. Vance's alleged rage, by this point, had become part of the mythos. Late-night hosts joked about it. Satirical clips portrayed him pacing, scowling at screens filled with Regina's face. The exaggeration only fueled the perception that he was losing control of the narrative, even if none of it was fair or accurate. Then came the most dangerous phase, inevitability. Once enough people start saying something feels inevitable, it begins to shape behavior. Media outlets prepare segments they claim they're not planning to air. Operatives draft contingency plans they insist they'll never use. Rivals position themselves for a future that hasn't been officially announced. Regina King, intentionally or not, had crossed into that territory. By now, even skeptics admitted that her influence was real. Whether she intended to run or not almost became irrelevant. The mere possibility had already altered the landscape. J.D. Vance was no longer campaigning in a vacuum. He was reacting to a shadow campaign that existed everywhere and nowhere at once, and that's what made it so unsettling. The final rumors suggested a breaking point was approaching. A decision point. Either Regina would step back, clarify, and let the storm pass, or she would step forward and turn speculation into declaration. Both options carried risk. One would make her look exposed. The other would make her look unstoppable. As for J.D. Vance, sources claimed he was preparing for both outcomes, publicly projecting confidence, privately bracing for confrontation. Because if Regina did run, it wouldn't just be another primary challenge. It would be a referendum on who gets to claim the future and who gets left explaining why they assumed it was theirs by default. And that's where the story stands. Now suspended, tense, unresolved. No official announcements. No signed papers. Just a political ecosystem holding its breath, watching two figures orbit each other with increasing gravity, waiting to see which one finally makes the move that turns rumor into reality. Because if Regina King does step forward, it won't just confirm everything people have been whispering. It will prove that sometimes the most powerful move in politics isn't declaring your intentions loudly, it's letting everyone else realize. Far too late that the game has already changed. So now the question is no longer what they are planning. The real question is what you think is actually happening here. Is Regina King really positioning herself for the biggest political leap of her life? Or is this the most elaborate media illusion we've seen in years? Is J.D. Vance reacting out of genuine concern, or because he sees something forming that he can't stop anymore? And if all of this is just noise, then why does it keep getting louder every single week? This is where the story stops being passive, because narratives like this don't survive on facts alone. They survive on attention, pressure, and public reaction. And every comment, every share, every argument pushes this saga one step further into reality. So I want to hear from you. Do you believe Regina King will actually run for president? Or is this a strategic bluff designed to shake the system? Did J.D. Vance lose control of the narrative? Or is he playing a longer, quieter game? Drop your thoughts below. Argue, debate, call it fake, call it genius. And if you want to stay ahead of the next breaking truth before it explodes everywhere else, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications because stories like this don't end quietly. And when the next move happens, you won't hear it from the people who want you calm.